Welcome to today's presentation covering the heart and circulation. We're glad you're joining us today because, as it turns out, heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States today. And so in this disease treatment, prevention, and cure class, wouldn't it be important to know how to help the #1 cause of death and disability today, and that is heart disease? We'll be looking at the heart, we'll also be looking at the circulation, and we'll be looking at lifestyle. And so please stay with us in this entire 3-part series as we look at how you can understand, how you can prevent in your own life, how you can actually help to reverse in your own life, and how you can help others in these same processes. Before we get any further, I'd like to take you to the actual statistics I just referenced. And this is actually a listing of the top causes of death in the United States. I believe this is from 2005, but the numbers are similar even today. Heart disease killed over 2 million people in that year. Cancer, almost 1 million. Stroke, 158,000. Now, the vast majority of people are dying from heart disease. And so it stands to reason that we must be educated not only in how we can prevent these complications and these illnesses stemming from circulatory disorders in our own lives, but also help others who are suffering, because many people today are perishing for lack of knowledge in simple things that could help to reduce the risk of heart disease. There are 2 types of heart disease where we will be mentioning today. One is known as atherosclerosis. This is referring to the hardening of the arteries due to a plaque formation. And this is different than the other form of hardening of the arteries. Other form of hardening of the arteries is arteriosclerosis. This is actually hardening of the artery wall itself. The actual wall of the vessel becomes stiff. And this may be a result of high blood pressure over time, could cause a stiffness of that vessel, and even a decreased in diameter of that vessel, but also chemical toxins such as alcohol. Many drugs will cause this as well, and many environmental toxins as well can bring about an increase in the hardening of the artery wall itself. Now, both of these are deadly, but the most deadly and the most prevalent by far is atherosclerosis. And so we're going to mainly be discussing this today. This is the #1 killer truly in the United States today. Let's take a look at the progression. How does this disease actually progress? Well, we see here a diagram that actually has laid out the stages of atherosclerosis. Basically, what we have here in the top of the vessel is a somewhat clean vessel. You see the artery walls are they're free from obstruction. They look kind of narrow and thin, and they're the same width on either side of this little hemisphere. But as you see going down to the bottom, you see this protrusion occurring until you get this big lump in the artery wall known as a complicated lesion. Now, by the way, this is actually a form of cancer. This is a complicated cellular division that's occurring here. It's not even just heart disease or artery disease. It's actually an atheroma. It's a kind of a fatty tumor that's developed here in the artery wall. Now, how do you get from a clean artery to a complicated lesion-filled artery? Well, the process is actually very simple, but it takes a long period of time in most cases. What you have here is a healthy artery that has been subjected to free radicals. Now, free radicals, if you haven't already had this explained to you before in a previous lecture, free radicals are similar to kind of a thief in the body. When a free radical enters the body, and even the body produces free radicals as a byproduct of metabolism and other cellular processes, you actually have a series of thieveries and robberies going on in the body. What happens is the free radical actually steals an electron from another element or compound or molecule. And so, in turn, that element that has just been the victim of robbery will in turn steal from someone else. And so you can liken it to someone who came to a building full of people and they had one shoe. And they said, well, I really need another shoe. So they stole a shoe from another person. They put it on themselves. Now that person had a need of a shoe. And so that person went and stole a shoe from someone else. And this process can continue down thousands and thousands of times if left unchecked. And so the damage potential for the artery wall is greatly increased when we have high levels of free radicals in the system. Now, when we actually have these high levels of free radicals, if we also have high levels of cholesterol, and this is mainly the LDL cholesterol, not so much HDL. HDL is the healthy cholesterol, H for healthy. LDL, it's known sometimes as lousy cholesterol. LDL is lousy cholesterol. But when LDL cholesterol becomes the victim of this robbery, it's similar to a school bus full of these cholesterol particles and some fats and these types of things as well. This LDL container, basically, is containing all these cholesterol molecules. But it's similar to this school bus having a blowout on its tire. And when it's traveling down this highway, it rams into the side of the expressway. And in the same way, this LDL cholesterol molecule that's containing all this cholesterol rams into the side of the artery, can enter in through the artery wall and end up inside of the artery wall. What happens then? Well, the cholesterol is oxidized. And so it's basically a very, very, very dangerous form of cholesterol. Now, the body naturally has cleaning mechanisms. And in the bloodstream, these cells actually that are responsible for a widespread cleaning are known as monocytes. When they sense a need to go and clean up, they go in through the tissues and they turn into something called a macrophage. And so they realize, hey, there's some cleanup that needs to happen over here on this interstate expressway. We need to go in and clean out all that cholesterol. And so they go in and they start to eat all this oxidized cholesterol. What happens as a result? Something very, very dangerous. They actually start to swell up. They cannot really digest this substance. Start to swell up and they die, swell up, die, swell up, die. They become something that's characterized by the name of foam cells, kind of like a foaming action that occurs here. And so what happens is this foaming action pushes out on the interior of the wall, and you have a tearing and a shearing force applied to the wall, and so you have an injury that's there. And so what happens when you have injury, you have more monocytes and more macrophages coming in and trying to clean up the area. And what happens then? More and more and more of these foam cells, until finally you get all of this push against the interior of the artery wall. You have all this damage inside of it, and eventually a rupture can occur. The complicated lesion is when a rupture has already started to protrude. Now, what happens next? Well, if a rupture occurs, and let's say a piece of the artery wall, the plaque, breaks off, it can travel down and get stuck in a narrower passageway. It can also get stuck in an area where there's another one of these clogs in the arteries. And so this is really the progression, and this is really the #1 killer in the United States today. Something as simple as this. But you know what? There's a simple solution as well. It doesn't have to end like this. This does not have to be what's going on in your arteries today. In fact, the Bible describes this whole condition in Isaiah 6:10. It says, "Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert, and be healed." As it turns out, Many people today are having this fat heart. And in fact, the plaques that are forming in atherosclerosis are actually fatty plaques. Not only are these inhibiting circulation, but once circulation is inhibited, you have many, many problems with other areas in the body. Did you know you actually have hearing difficulty? Our ears become heavy. Our eyes, we lose our vision becomes dimmed. And so if our ears are heavy and our eyes are shut, how can we see with our eyes and hear with our ears and understand with our heart and really know how the Lord wants to heal us? So really our prayer needs to be, as was echoed in David's prayer here, Psalms 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. This is the clean heart we need. These are the clean arteries that we need. And we can only get them by walking in the way of the Lord, whether it's taken conversion or whether we've already been walking, and the Lord's blessing upon our circulatory system, that we can truly be healed and be in health. But many people, as I said before, are perishing for a lack of knowledge in physical lines and in spiritual lines as well. And so, wouldn't it be wise if we familiarized ourselves with this very system that we are dealing with here, the cardiovascular system? Let's actually take a look at the purpose behind this wonderful mechanism. The main focus of the cardiovascular system is to distribute nutrient-rich blood through a network of vessels and also to aid in the elimination and detoxification of waste products in the body as well. Why is this important? Well, Leviticus 17:11 tells us the life of the flesh is in the blood. And truly, if our blood circulation is impeded, our life is impeded as well. What's actually found in the blood? Well, the blood is 83% water by weight. We also have cells and debris and gases that are floating around in this circulation. We have red blood cells that carry the oxygen and help to get rid of carbon dioxide as well. We have the white blood cells that are components of our immune system that help fight infection, help fight viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungal infections, and even help to get rid of cellular debris and break down components or broken down components of old cells. We also have platelets which aid in the clotting. If let's say we have a traumatic injury and we're bleeding, the platelets will help to stem that the blood loss. We also have nutrients that are passed through the bloodstream. We have blood glucose, which is our energy. That's actually converted from carbohydrates and some other sources as well, broken down in various processes, but mainly from carbohydrates. We have the glucose. We also have triglycerides, which are our fats in a stored form. We have free fatty acids as well. I don't want too many of those, but enough of those will help give our muscles plenty of energy. We have diffused gases. We have vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that are so essential in helping to prevent those school buses from running into the guardrails, so to speak, of our vessels. And we even have hormones, which are chemical messages that are being sent through the bloodstream. So many, many things are passing and being propelled along in this wonderful highway of life. In the smallest areas of the circulatory system, we're going to focus mainly on these for this slide, because this is truly where the life is being exchanged. The capillary system. We have something like 60,000 miles of capillary in our body. Capillaries basically are there so that the very, very small particles can be diffused or can be sent through the wall over into the tissues where the cells can actually get the nutrients. We actually have a video that you might want to check out on, it's actually on YouTube. It's entitled Hydrostatic Pressure in the Cardiovascular System. If you'd like to learn more about this intricate system by which life is brought to the cells. Basically though, in a summary of this system, we have a pressure that's exerted by the heart and by the elasticity of the arteries that's pushing things out into the cells. And we also have a pressure that's bringing things in. This is known as osmotic pressure, bringing in waste products and other products that need to go back into the circulation. And this is brought about by a osmotic gradient. And you can actually learn a lot more about that by watching that short video on hydrostatic pressure in the cardiovascular system. Not only are the capillaries the most important part of the system, but they're really the end result of this highway of life. We can liken this unto a great interstate system in maybe one of our major cities. And basically what happens is we have a very, very large highway that's coming out of the heart. Let's say there's a large highway that's coming out of New York City. A lot of people are commuting on this highway. And so they're driving along this largest artery, we'll say. The largest artery in the body is the aorta. That comes out of the heart. Let's go back to New York City, though. We're driving out of New York City. There's a lot of congestion, a lot of traffic, and then we turn off on a smaller interstate. A little bit less congestion here at times, a little bit more room in which to travel. And these are the arterials. And then the major arteries. Then we go into the even smaller highways and byways, the arterials. Now, where do you need to get from if you're leaving New York City? Obviously, you have some place to go. You're not just going to drive around aimlessly. You either have a home or an office or a hotel to go to. And so the capillaries are kind of like this end point. You get to a point where you're ready to get out of your car, go inside, rest a while, come back, get in your car, and then you go back, commute back over to New York City. The capillaries are that station where the blood cells, they're not really stagnant, but they're moving in such a slow rate, and they're moving along such a long surface area that they can actually put a lot of their nutrients out, and they can take other things in. And so once they've made that exchange, similar to you having a nice sleep and getting back in your car, you get back on that smaller highway and byway. Then you go over, and that's a venule in the circulatory system. Then they would get back on the larger veins, and then back to the vena cava, which is the largest vein. Now, that largest vein actually goes right into the heart, the right side of the heart, known as the right atrium. And of course, we have this series of chambers in the heart whereby the blood is pumped out into the right ventricle and then pumped out over into the lungs. This is where you get more oxygen. And those are actually capillaries in the lungs, so you get those, that oxygenation from. We'll see that in a couple more slides. But it's eventually pumped out back into the other side of the heart and then goes back into the aorta, which remember is like that major thoroughfare leaving New York City. So you have this big cycle going on whereby you have the blood being pumped with oxygen. We get this oxygen from our lungs, of course, and then eventually being pumped out back to the body, and whereby going to the capillary system, and then you have the nutrients returning or the waste products returning over to the heart, going to the lungs again. Actually get rid of some waste products like carbon dioxide in the lungs, and you get more positive nutrients like oxygen. So it's really a wonderful cycle, this cycle of life that we have going on here in this system. Take a look here at the capillary beds in the alveoli, which are the smallest functional areas of the lungs. This is where you have a diffusion of the oxygen into the capillaries, and a transfer also of carbon dioxide out into the alveoli from the capillaries. So you get nice oxygen that your body needs, and you get rid of excess carbon dioxide, which is actually a waste product of metabolism. So it's really a wonderful cycle that's going on here. In looking again at the capillary system, we find something astounding. Now, this view is not really the best representation of the capillary system. Rather, the capillary system is more likened unto a very, very, very narrow passageway, whereby sometimes it's so narrow that only one red blood cell can fit at a time. You have to go single file in through these very, very small passageways. But although these passageways are very small, as I said before, the average person has 60,000 miles of these microscopic blood vessels. And although we have so many of these, so much length of these vessels, it's also interesting that only 5% of the total blood volume is in the capillary system at any given time. Most of the blood volume is in the heart or the arteries, or even some in the larger veins, mainly in the arteries and arterioles. But it's interesting because one approach to lowering blood pressure is to kind of spread out the circulation, not just to have it confined just to the areas we use all the time, which is where the blood is going to be. People suffering from high blood pressure oftentimes don't exercise, and through exercising they can actually expand and grow, even increase the capillary systems in their muscles. And so they can have more blood flow there, the blood volume can be spread out a little bit better, and they can actually have a lowering of their blood pressure in total, and health and nourishment brought to the muscles and other tissues as well. So although the capillary system is small, and although the capillary system is sometimes unused as it should be, we need to treat this as really just as important as the heart, right there in the capillaries. In our final part of this program, we'll be looking at lifestyle treatment to help improve capillary health. But I do want to focus on one thing in particular, and that is that just breathing fresh air helps to ensure adequate capillary function. In fact, there was a study that was conducted that looked at indoor air pollution. It found that when air was filtered, when it was actually clean, you can actually ventilate your home and get clean air also, they actually had an improved capillary blood flow by an average of 8.1%. That's not even going out and exercising, that's just opening the windows and getting fresh air. So it's not only about exercise, it's about everything that we do. For everything we do affects our life, and the life is in the blood. So we need to promote circulation, we need to promote the health of our heart, and all the way down to our capillaries. It's essential to having good health. Now, we're told that we need to guard the heart. We need to protect the heart. In Proverbs 4:23, it says, "Keep or guard thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Can you do anything without your mind? Can you do anything without a proper circulation to your mind? I'll submit to you, no. Can't do anything at that point. Some people will say that it's pretty much over for you. You can't really do much at all. Can't think, can't decide, can't function as a normal human being. So it's essential for us to guard our heart, and even more importantly, to guard our minds, because our minds are most often the source of heart disease and cardiovascular disease, because we make poor decisions with our mind. And then what happens is our mind is affected by our poor decisions, and we have this kind of like a dog chasing its tail. We get a clouded mind, we get worse health in our arteries, and it clouds our mind even more, and then our arteries get even worse health. What we need is a clarity of thought, a clarity of mind, and a clarity of heart. is what we need here. This is why our prayer must be this. Psalms 139, verses 23 through 24. Read, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." It's essential that we make this prayer our own. For if we are to have a healthy heart and a healthy and clear mind, there are conditions to be observed. In fact, in Counsels on Health, page 31, we find this very, very important admonition. There are conditions to be observed by all who would preserve health. All should learn what these conditions are. The Lord is not pleased with ignorance in regard to His laws, either natural or spiritual. We are to be workers together with God for the restoration of health to the body as well as to the soul. Deuteronomy 5:29. We find that God is truly, truly longing for us to have clean hearts, clear minds, healthy decisions, and a character after His image. Deuteronomy 5:29, the Lord pleads, "Oh, that there were such an heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and their children forever." There are conditions to be observed then, as we just saw. There are conditions to be observed. And the Lord is longing for us to realize what these conditions are and to turn from the ways that are bringing disease and disability, discouragement, depression, and disheartenment upon us. What is the cause of heart failure today? Well, it's interesting. We can see in the Bible that there are some methods whereby hearts are failing. The most common that comes to mind is Luke 21:2. Says, "Men's hearts failing them for fear." And I'll submit to you that that fear is not so much the fact that people are afraid, it's that people are not fearing God. They're not listening to God. They're afraid of the end result of their lives, yes, because there's no peace for the wicked, the Bible says. So they have nothing really to look forward to. Luke 21 through 25, this is what they look forward to. It says, "And there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the seas and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Now, we think that we are to be medical missionaries and to go out and to help a world that is dying from disease. But this admonition would show us that people are also dying for the lack of knowledge and discernment in biblical lines. They don't know what's happening in the world today. And so they're afraid, they're confused, and they're truly perishing for lack of knowledge. This is why we're told that we are to be His ambassadors. We're to bring people the light. We're to bring people the way, and we're to bring people the truth as well. The way, truth, and the life, Jesus Christ, His ambassadors today. Why is that? Because we don't have anything truly to fear if we're fearing God, if we're walking in His ways. Our hearts are going to be pure, our minds are going to be pure, even our physical hearts. Our arteries are going to be clean. Do you realize that? We'll discuss that in our last presentation. But there's a promise in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 43:1. Says, "But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and He that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine." This is the Lord's promise to us today. Although many people's hearts may be failing them for lack of fear, our hearts can be bound up with His, and we can be enjoying this life that will last on until He comes in the clouds to make us all new. He came to give us life even more abundantly on this earth, even right now. So wouldn't it be wise for us to know a little bit about the physiology of heart disease in general. If we're going to help people not only in their minds, but also in their physical bodies, we must know about physiology. So we're going to study here a little bit what constitutes heart failure, why men's hearts fail them. Many of this has to do with lack of knowledge and lack of obedience to God's way, God's plan for our lives. Congestive heart failure. We actually see a depiction here of the pulmonary circuit, the heart, and the circulation of the lungs. And congestive heart failure is one of the leading causes of death also in the United States today. Most commonly brought about by complication from a heart attack. Smoking can also cause it, and uncontrolled high blood pressure can also bring this about. Now, heart failure basically represents or would indicate that there is a part of the cardiac muscle that is defective or that is died, that's covered over with scar tissue, and so it's not functioning properly. It's not putting in its share of the work. So what happens is the heart starts to get larger and larger to try to compensate for the portion that's not doing its work. And the heart was not designed to bulk up. It was designed to be an endurance muscle, not to be a bulked up muscle. You see bodybuilders who have this huge amount of weight on them, huge amount of muscle. A lot of times they can't run a mile because their muscles have been so trained as to only be able to lift extremely heavy weights, not cross-trained to also have an extreme amount of endurance. And so our hearts are not designed to have an extreme amount of power. They need a certain amount of power, of course, and strength, but mainly to have endurance. For the heart beats millions of times in your lifetime. So, going back to this diagram, one thing we'll see here is the left side and the right side of the heart. You can have problems with both sides at once, but more commonly what people will have is either right-sided heart failure or left-sided heart failure. For right-sided heart failure, some of the causative factors here are some kind of a backup of the blood in the lungs. Some conditions that can cause this and bring it about are COPD, that's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and emphysema. This is really where smoking comes into play here. And some of the symptoms of right-sided heart failure are edema, where you have excess fluid in your tissues, and what happens is, well, this will settle down in your dependent areas, such as down at the feet, if you're standing a lot, maybe even in the arms and the hands, if your hands are down at your side a lot. The liver gets congested, and there's some other problems as well. But the main symptom here being the edema, because you have this excess fluid that's not coming back to the heart because there's such a congestion there in the lungs. So it's congested also in the right atriums and in the vena cava as well. So when we look at left-sided heart failure has a lot to do with backup in the arterial circulation, such as hardening of the arteries or aortic stenosis, where the aorta is not very elastic anymore. You get this from smoking especially. Other lifestyle factors as well can cause this. But a great symptom of this, of left-sided heart failure, is pulmonary edema. The blood needs to go somewhere, and so the excess force is exerting it actually in an opposite direction of where it should go. It's going back into the lungs. And so you have pulmonary edema. You have excess fluid in the capillaries, coming out of the capillary system there in the lungs. Whereas right-sided heart failure, you have excess fluid coming out of the capillary system in the systemic circulation. Left-sided heart failure, you have excess fluid coming out of the capillary system in the lungs. So right-sided, all over the body, you find the symptoms mainly. Left-sided, mainly find backup or congestion fluid in the lungs. You have difficulty breathing, etc. We're going to take right now a view inside the heart. There's some other important things here to consider. The heart has valves, and valves are very essential in keeping the blood where it should be, keeping it properly making the proper transition from one location to another. It's kind of like a door that will open only one way, and you can't go back in. It's like walking in a door in a major store, and it's set up so it only lets you go in. It doesn't let you come out of that door. Why is that? Because there's a purpose behind it. And so the order that needs to be kept in the store is essential, but even more so, the order that needs to be kept in the heart is essential. So we see here the echocardiogram, actually, which is just an imaging study of the heart, showing a cross-section of the heart. Now, if we would actually take a look at this little layover, we'll find this cross-section, we actually see a couple of the valves right here. The atrial valve, we also see, oh, that's the aortic valve, I'm sorry. Aortic valve, the mitral valve, and the tricuspid valve right there in the heart. We'll go back to that now. As you see there, those are valves that have been opened, and the chambers are filled when the valves are open. And there, once again, we see a cross-section. So this is very interesting to note that order must be maintained. Proper movement from one section to the other of the heart must be maintained. When a portion of the heart muscle has died due to heart failure, a lot of this is thrown off. And so you end up with problems with the valves and problems with circulation going even backwards and backing up in certain areas. Not only are valves important for the heart, but they're also very important for the veins. Veins are our very low pressure vessel for blood, and so what the veins rely upon a lot are simply the function of their valves. It's almost like a trap door, almost like a fish ladder. If you know what a fish ladder is, they actually put these by dams where they've created an artificial dam in some kind of river where fish would normally swim up to spawn in their native territories. And so the fish still need to get past the dam, so what happens is they get on this fish ladder. The fish ladder will allow them to get up to a certain spot, and it'll keep them there at that certain spot. Then they can jump up a little bit higher, they stay in that certain spot there. Get a little bit higher, stay in that certain spot there. A little bit higher, stay in that certain spot there. And so when the blood is propelled in through the veins, it's going opens a valve. The pressure that's exerting on the valve in the opposite direction will close the valve so that the blood doesn't trickle back down and go back down into the capillaries once it's gone into the veins. Ideally, the blood should be going into the vena cava, returning to the heart, going and getting oxygen, dropping off its carbon dioxide, then going back to the capillaries. So we don't want blood to hang around in the capillaries that's not really functional, not really doing its job. What you see here is a diagram of a heart attack. This, I mentioned before, is one of the causative factors in congestive heart failure. We see here a plaque that's been built up. This is atherosclerosis, remember? This buildup on the artery walls, and the blood flow has been stopped. Now, muscle requires an adequate amount of blood for it to function, especially heart muscle that's an endurance type muscle. And so if the blood is stemmed, we don't have any more blood flow to a certain amount of tissue, that muscle will die. And with that death of the muscle, we have a loss of function in the heart. This is actually kind of what cardiac muscle looks like after a heart attack. Just 1 week after a heart attack, we see there are a lot of macrophages, which are kind of like the cleanup crew in the immune system. A lot of macrophages in here trying to eat it all up and get all the debris out. And what will form here instead of muscle will be scar tissue. Scar tissue, unfortunately, is not a good conductor of electricity. And cardiac muscle depends on proper electrical impulses to ensure its proper timing. You've seen this before, the QRS complex. This is a EKG shown right here next to the heart. It's just basically a measure of the electrical impulses that are going on in certain parts of the heart. We see here we have this diagram of the heart muscle actually going, we have an impulse that's being secreted or being stimulated from a portion of the heart. And if we have a scar tissue formed here, we're going to have a very difficult time with electrical impulses being transmitted. We have certain nodes in the heart. We have the AV node, atrioventricular node, and we have many, many fibers running through the middle of the heart as well. If these things are interrupted, it's kind of similar to having electrical lines severed. And so if our electrical lines are severed, how can we pass electricity? How can the heart pass electrical impulses properly to the other parts of the heart muscle, which must be beating at a certain time and a certain rate in order to ensure that blood is being transferred from one part of the heart to the next in a systematic, organized way? With the death of heart muscle, this can be impeded. Now, I'll submit to you today, many people will look at this and they'll shake their heads and they'll say, well, I already have this problem. There's no hope for me yet. But I'll submit to you today that there is hope today. There is hope. Because what we need to do really is realize that God can take that scar tissue and He can move it out of the way. He can do all things. He truly can. Because He said in Psalms 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. You see, it was recently discovered that cardiac muscle cells can be regenerated. Many people in days past, years past, thought that you were born with all your cardiac muscle cells, you'll die with the same ones you were born with. But actually, that's not true. That is a misconception. A study in the April 3rd version, 2009 issue of the magazine Science revealed that individuals who had been around during nuclear bomb testing and had elevated levels of radioactive carbon-14 in their cardiac cells actually turned out to be a good case population, study population for this, this idea of asking, do cardiac muscle cells regenerate? Why is that? Because the study found that samples from people born before 1955 did not have this elevated carbon-14 in their cells. But what happened was that by using DNA samples from people's hearts, the researchers estimated that a 20-year-old renews about 1% of heart muscle cells per year. And about 45% of the heart muscle of a 50-year-old was generated after he or she was born. Almost 50% of heart muscle cells were regenerated by the year 50 years old. And so the Lord can do wonders. He can do wonders through our hearts. And it's amazing because scientists have since found that the reason why cardiac muscle cells will regenerate is because of the presence of something called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a very, very interesting chemical that's secreted and found in elevated levels, not only in the brain, but even in the body, after feelings of intense joy, peace, and love. And so when we ask the Lord to create in us a clean heart, what are we truly asking for? We also must be asking that we would be partakers of His love and that we would live by His Spirit. For apart from His Spirit, we absolutely cannot be partakers of true joy, true love, and true peace. If it's your desire today to take hold of this message of health and healing, there will be strength to your navel and fatness to all your flesh, I would like to ask you to review the cry of David in Psalms 51. There's a lot to learn from this prayer, and truly we must make it our own. This prayer must be our own, to create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me.